A well-regulated militia be necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I'm glad you're with us today. This is the first day that the new rules on unfinished frames and receivers are now in effect. The gun-making kits that have become, I think, increasingly popular over the last couple of years, now considered firearms in and of themselves by the Biden administration and by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Yes, the new ghost guns rule is in effect today, despite court challenges, as the Washington Post reports. We had federal judges in North Dakota and in Texas on Tuesday refused to grant an injunction blocking these new laws from taking effect, which has led to sites like this on a lot of different web platforms here temporarily closed, making changes to the website in order to comply with the new ATF rule that is effective on August 24th, 2022. Really difficult right now to find not just, kits, but even just 80% frames or receivers right now, even though the Biden administration, a DOJ judge, or a DOJ attorney rather, told that judge in Texas during the oral arguments on that request for an injunction. This Texas company, Division 80, said, listen, if this rule goes into effect, we're not going to be able to sell our products without becoming an FFL because all these things are going to have to be serialized. We sell 80% frames and receivers. The DOJ attorney actually said, no, you're not covered by that. This new rule, it doesn't apply to you. It applies to these DIY kits. And the federal judge overseeing this hearing said, responded to Division 8, well, what does that do to your case? And they said, well, it still stands because the laws are so, or the rules rather, are so vaguely written. We have no idea what is covered. And to be sure, today, even though the Biden administration argued in Texas that Division 80's products were not actually covered under this new rule, that instead this rule applied only to serializing kits, Division 80's not selling their 80% frames and receivers. Either are any other companies that I've been able to find online. Now, I didn't do an exhaustive search. Maybe there are a couple of companies out there that are still doing it, but I've not been able to find anybody right now who is making, again, not kits, but just simply, unfinished frames and receivers available for sale today. The Washington Post reporting on the judge's decision in North Dakota. That was the first decision we saw yesterday in which a judge says, now we're going to allow this rule to go into effect. They write, opponents of the rule denounced it as an unconstitutional overreach. Federal lawsuit filed in North Dakota by plaintiffs, including a gun store in the state, group of Republican attorneys general, and Gun Owners of America, said the rule, quote, violates principles of federalism and will sow chaos within large segments of the firearms community. But yesterday, Chief Judge Peter Welty of the District of North Dakota denied that request for a preliminary or permanent injunction, writing that the Biden administration has acted within its authority in laying out the rule. Welty, by the way, nominated by President Donald Trump, wrote that the new rules, quote, or the new rule, rather, was and remains constitutional under the Second Amendment. In this 27-page order, he wrote, without a doubt, this case presents divisive issues that all parties care deeply about and are of national concern and importance, as documented by the participation of nearly every state in the country in this action. Nevertheless, he said, this court's rule and responsibility remains the same, to apply the law to the facts and not to the arguments or policy of each case. Now, just because the request for an injunction was denied doesn't mean that the case will not proceed. But it is a signal that not just this judge in North Dakota, but this judge in Texas don't believe it is likely that the plaintiffs are going to win on the merits of this case. In other words, based on what they've heard so far, they think that this rule is likely to be upheld and there's no reason to put a halt to its enforcement. I disagree. I am curious to see what the reaction from other folks who actually, have law degrees have to say about this. Mark Brnovich, who is the Attorney General in Arizona, and he was leading the effort on the part of the Republican AGs, his office did release a statement saying that Brnovich was, quote, disappointed with the judge's decision, and that the Attorney General, quote, will continue to defend the Second Amendment against overly burdensome regulations, saying, quote, the right to keep and bear arms includes the ability to procure guns as well as parts and ammunition. So we do have chaos, undoubtedly, again, as you've seen if you've tried to buy an 80% framer receiver today. But what is likely to happen next? That's kind of where I'm interested. Obviously, again, these lawsuits, I should say, will continue to proceed. But I think it's also fair to say that the Biden administration, new ATF Director Steve Dettelbach, and the gun control lobby are going to be emboldened by the fact that this rule has been upheld, at least for now. Remember, they've got at least one other rule in the pipeline. This rule that will likely lead to pistol stabilizing braces having to be registered under the National Firearms Act. We are still waiting for the final publication of this rule. Senator James Lankford led a group of senators just about a month or so ago in writing to Steve Dettelbach, expressing their concerns about this proposed rule, which the ATF said in a status report in a lawsuit filed by the Second Amendment Foundation just a couple of months ago, that they expect this final rule to be published in December of this year and then take effect, 90 to 120 days after that. That, I think, has been pushed back from what we've been hearing earlier in the year. But again, beyond the stabilizing brace issue, which, by the way, is no insignificant matter, given that as many as 40 million Americans, by some estimates, could ultimately be impacted by this ATF rule, I still don't think that is the end of the Biden administration's attempt to legislate new gun control laws via executive branch regulation. And I think really that is the issue here. I know this federal judge said, it's perfectly fine for the ATF to do what the ATF did under the Gun Control Act of 1968. Again, I'm not an attorney, much less a judge, but I would disagree. When the ATF now has the authority to designate things that are clearly not firearms as firearms, because somebody could make something into a firearm, I think that goes beyond the language of the Gun Control Act of 1968. But again, I'm not a judge. If I was, it'd be a very different decision that was issued yesterday. So what else might be in the pipeline here? If the gun control lobby and the Biden administration believe that regulatory action is the quickest way to enact gun control, especially if Republicans take back either the House or the Senate in November, and I still think it is likely that the Republicans are going to take back the House. I'm a lot more concerned about the Senate at this point. And I have to say, I'm getting increasingly concerned that a red wave election may be receding based on what we've seen in a couple of special elections, including the special election last night in New York, in which a swing district basically acted the way that it did in 2020. It was a special election to Congress. The Democratic nominee got about 51% of the vote. The Republican got about 48% of the vote. That largely matches what we saw in that district back in 2020. And I understand special elections, low turnout, things can be different, but there are signs out there. If you're a pessimist, and there's certainly signs out there that we may not be looking at this dominating red wave come November. Look, a lot of things can change. I think the economy is in a very perilous place right now. But at the moment, the idea that Republicans are going to handily take back both the House and the Senate, I don't think we can assume that's going to be the case. Again, all it takes, though, is for Republicans to take control of one chamber in Congress, and all of a sudden, Joe Biden's gun control efforts, legislatively anyway, are dead in the water, right? Even the ban on so-called assault weapons that was passed by the House, the Senate cannot pick that up in January. A new session of Congress begins and everything, the clock starts all over again. So even if the Democrats were to, let's say, gain a couple of seats in the Senate, they can't act on the gun ban that was passed by the House earlier this year. They would have to do that again before the end of the year. And right now, they just don't have the votes. So I still think that we are going to see more regulatory action. And my concern is that this decision today, well, again, or yesterday, still leaving the lawsuits in place, might give the administration reason to believe that they can go much further. And, we've talked about this a couple of times here on Cam and Company over the past several months, but gun control advocates are arguing in court right now that the ATF has the ability to regulate all semi-automatic long guns, and in fact, all semi-automatic firearms under the National Firearms Act, because the semi-automatic firearms are, quote, readily converted to machine guns, and therefore should be treated as such. Now, again, I think that's a huge reach, right? It's one thing to talk about trying to regulate unserialized firearms or even unfinished firearms under the Gun Control Act of 1968. That is a pretty small portion of the broader universe of legally possessed firearms in this country. Going after virtually all semi-automatic firearms and claiming that they should be regulated under the National Firearms Act, that would be a huge step. That would be a bold move, sort of a Hail Mary pass by the gun control movement and the Biden administration. But I can't help but think that the fact that these ghost gun rules are now in effect makes it at least slightly more plausible that the Biden administration may very well try to do that Hail Mary. Particularly, again, if they know that a legislative path to more gun control has been thwarted for at least 2 years. So keep your eyes on what's going on with the ATF. I mean, there's a lot going on with Steve Dettelbach now in charge there. Not only, do we have these knock and talk visits to gun owners that are popping up in the news around the country, where somebody who, bought a couple of guns over a couple month period of time, all of a sudden gets a visit from several ATF agents. No warrant, just asking them questions. Hey, can we see the gun? Do you still have the gun? What happened to the gun? Right. Supposedly this is all about cracking down on straw purchases. While that's going on, we're seeing reports that rare breed triggers are being seized from customers who purchased them. And now we've got, again, the new quote-unquote ghost gun rules in effect, the stabilizing brace rules that are on the way. And I just don't see the Biden administration stopping there. So we will keep our eyes on everything coming out of Washington, D.C. I should be clear, by the way. I've heard no inkling or rumors that the administration is preparing to publish a rule that would regulate all semi-automatic firearms under the National Firearms Act. I've seen nothing to indicate that is imminent from the administration. However, there again is plenty of evidence that the gun control lobby is pushing for this, both in court filings that we've seen from groups like Giffords and Brady, where they have argued in litigation against gun stores that these firearms should be treated like machine guns. The Trace, Michael Bloomberg's anti-gun website, has run a couple of pieces over the past couple of months talking about how the ATF could do something like this, noting that I think it was back in the 80s, the ATF said, well, this particular model of firearm made by this particular company can be readily converted to a machine gun if you do, this one simple trick. So we're going to say that this model it needs to be changed or it's got to be covered under the NFA. They're bringing this up as examples of the type of action that the Biden administration could take if it really wants to be aggressive on gun control. And I suspect, again, that after the midterms, Biden may be willing to go much more aggressively via executive action than what we have seen to date. All right, let's turn our attention now to today's Armed Citizen story, our good deed of the day, and our recidivist report. We'll start there with a case out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where a man had a 15-year prison sentence suspended and instead was sentenced to probation in a shooting that took place last year. 15 years down to, well, nothing, basically. A slap on the wrist. The gentleman in question, 19-year-old Arian Storm Green, was charged originally with attempted murder, but he pleaded guilty back in June to a felony charge of intimidation with a dangerous weapon, as well as going armed with intent. According to authorities, Green was identified as firing a handgun at a gentleman named Jalen Jackson back on August 26th of 2021. Police said that Green, after shooting multiple rounds, then fled on foot. Jackson was not injured, thankfully, during the shooting. Green was arrested in January of this year by the U.S. Marshals Northern Iowa Fugitive Task Force on outstanding warrants, which again would seem to indicate that this was being treated as a pretty serious case until the plea agreement was offered. And as the Cedar Rapids Gazette reports, as part of the plea agreement, 6th Judicial District Chief Judge Lars Anderson ran the 10 and 5-year sentences consecutively for a total of 15 years, but then suspended both and sentenced Arian Green to 3 years of probation. Anderson warned Green that the 15-year sentence is, quote, hanging over your head, and if he violates his probation, he could be sent to prison, warning him that the best thing to do is to stay away from drugs and firearms. Well, I sure hope that young Mr. Green takes advantage of the judge's advice, as well as the sweetheart plea deal that he was offered. But I got to say, man, 3 years probation for shooting at somebody when you were originally eligible for 15 years behind bars? Yeah, that rubs me the wrong way. Today's Armed Citizen story from California, Riverside County, California, where an intruder was killed early this morning during an attempted burglary at an apartment. Local media in Southern California, reporting that this intruder apparently was shot around 1:30 this morning. The homeowner, unfortunately, or the apartment dweller, was shot as well. Police found both the attacker and the victim suffering from gunshot wounds when they arrived on the scene. According to authorities, both fired several shots during the attempted burglary. Video evidence appears to show at least one bullet hole in a window. The intruder passed away at the hospital. The homeowner, who was found in a car that apparently crashed in the parking lot, was wounded in his lower body. He is expected to survive his injuries, thankfully. We will keep our eyes on this story. Given that it is Southern California, I suppose the possibility always exists that this homeowner could be charged for defending himself, but I would like to think that somebody breaks into your home and starts shooting at you, even in Southern California, you have the right to shoot back. Today's good deed of the day, also from California, more, I guess, the Bay Area, where the California Highway Patrol is praising a good Samaritan who not only was in the right place and at the right time to save somebody who drove off a cliff, but actually climbed down 300 feet in order to rescue that individual. Yeah, I know. This was in La Honda, California. It was Monday night. An elderly man who had been reported missing apparently drove off this cliff, tumbled hundreds of feet down. He was driving a white Land Rover, and he ended up 300 feet down this hill. He spent the night outside. He wasn't found until Tuesday morning when a good Samaritan, who was described as a man in his 70s, spotted that vehicle. And according to Art Montiel, who's the public information officer for the CHP in Redwood City, the 70-something-year-old man went back to the scene, tied a rope to his truck, and then climbed down the hill to assist the man who had, suffered this accident. CHP deputies, fire crews arrived soon afterwards to help complete the rescue. Officer Montiel says they don't recommend climbing down the side of a cliff to aid others, but they are grateful, they say, for this individual's quick thinking. They say, quote, "We appreciate it whenever the public calls in." Yeah, I know you can't encourage people to, tie a rope to their truck and then rappel down the side of a cliff to help somebody out. I know you can't encourage that. But I have a feeling that they're very grateful for this action as well. The driver, by the way, that man who was reported missing, is expected to recover from his injuries. He did have some injuries reported as a result of that accident, but it looks like he is going to be okay as well. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I want to thank you, as always, for joining me here on the program. Don't forget to check out bearingarms.com throughout the day for even more of the latest Second Amendment news and information. We've got you covered. If you like what you see, you can always become a VIP member as well. Just go to bearingarms.com/subscribe. Use the promo code GUNRIGHTS, and you can get a significant savings on your membership. And as our way of saying thanks for showing your support, we're going to give you exclusive content, news stories, analysis, stuff you won't find anywhere else, because your support does matter, and it really does make a difference. So thank you again. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, and be free.